Right, folks. Hello. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Policy Panel. I'm Councillor Leslie Scott-Boutelle and I'm the chairman of the panel and will be chairing tonight's meeting. To begin with the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Runcorn Street. The meeting is being audio recorded for live broadcast over the internet on the council's website and will also be available to listen to afterwards. Please would speakers use microphone at all times, and this for me is really important. Speak directly into the microphone, as that activates the audio recording and is required for those using the Hearing Loop system. Please speak from a position close to the microphone. I'd really appreciate that, folks. Members of the panel use electronic devices to access their agenda and reports and may view and participate in social media. Visitors are also welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We may have a break at 8 o'clock subject to the items remaining. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. Introductions. I'd like to, members of the panel and officers would introduce themselves, starting with
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Turned it on, turned off. Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor, Beachurch.
Councillor Jocelyn Law, Labour and Co-op, Councillor Highwoods Ward.
Councillor Paul Smith, Liberal Democrats, St Anne's and St John's Ward, substituting for Councillor.
Councillor John Jazz, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Councillor Kevin Bentley, Markstown Lair Ward.
Councillor Sarah Naylor, Lexton and Braithwaite Ward, substituting for Councillor Smithson.
Tricia Smith, I'm a Research and Change Officer.
Libby Britcher, Research and Change Officer.
Rory Doyle, Assistant Director, Environment.
Rosa Tanfield, Group Manager for Neighbourhood Services.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer and talk to the panel.
Thank you, and I'd like to welcome Paul and Sarah to the meeting. This is the first time for both of you. It's been a while since you've been here, isn't it, Paul? Thank you. Anyway, item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items scheduled for this meeting. Item 4, declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations that they wish to share with us? Nope. Minutes. Can I invite councillors to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2022?
Agreed, Chair.
Everybody in favour? Thank you. Right, item 6, have your say. There's nobody here to have a general have their say, is there? So we are on to item 7. Have your say on the future of Colchester. Right, we start with having a quick looky see. Mr. Chilvers, would you like to come to the table and present? And you have slightly longer than the usual 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
had the 2-hour focus group for change. I was invited to Councillor Susie. These matters I would have raised. It was supposed to be so in no special order. Leisure World. Do you have to do everything that you do down there? Swimming pool is obviously essential, but is everything else? A lot of fitness is done by the private sector now. Places are popping up in neighbourhoods all over town. Should there be some repurposing of some of it, perhaps? CBC doesn't have to be the universal sports provider, in my view. Wheelie bins. My neighbourhood didn't want them, but we quickly got used to them. Of course, they aren't suitable for everywhere, but if we in Old Heath can manage them, I see no reason why Lexington, Mersey and other rural areas shouldn't be made to have them. The original rollout wasn't sold well. The plus points for the user weren't emphasised. It was all about recycling instead of highlighting user convenience. The current situation might have suited the politics when first introduced, but the borough demographics have changed and the council makeup has changed. Now stop pandering to the naysayers and roll them out. But to adapt, if you want a reference, ask Janet, my wife, for one. Town centre, a nice place to live. Now, if you want to, I'm saying this in relation to the master plans. If you want to convert areas from secondary commercial use to housing, you need to review how the nighttime economy works. Its reputation for night crime and disorder will impact on the desirability of residents you want to build. There will have to be more focus on enforcement by CBC and the other agencies. Janet and I often walk around the city early on a Saturday evening. We live fairly close. It's like the Wild West. We're not brave enough to go in later. Cars whiz around the town. Delivery cyclists bounce on and off pavements, zigzagging the pedestrians. Wire streets are used as a rat run. And then there's the late public order problems, which we only read about in the paper because by then we were probably tucked up in bed. Unless the nighttime economy is better policed and regulated, who on earth would want to set up home in Vineyard Street or St Bottles area, where every weekend you have disturbance into the early hours and probably a half-eaten kebab on your doorstep? Answer, only the desperate and feckless. It can't be ignored. You could find your crime and social problems increase, and that will only rub off on the image of the whole town and kill any thriving commerce. Aspirational types or nice families setting up home in the Colchester area will give the centre a wide berth. Planners need to talk seriously to enforcement. Gentrified or vibrant, you can't have it both ways. Now, this isn't in your gift, but it's one to note in the margins. GP services in the town centre. I hope planners have put NHS on notice for the need to factor in a GP service to cover the extra residents coming into the centre in the next 10 years. East Hill, Wimpole Road, the North Station surgeries, just those three alone, don't have the capacity. Just bunging extra money to them isn't going to help. They actually need 4 areas. It needs a well-situated property as professional service to serve professionals to services. Redundant unit, perhaps, shop, church. Don't let it become an afterthought. Now, street services, do we have enough mechanised pavement sweepers so areas beyond the inner core get a fair share of attention? It's essential services. Now, look, my locals aren't clamouring to get to the Northern Sports Park, but they do want their main pavements attended to more often. And I bet other areas feel the same. Now, I'll finish on consultations. Be a bit wary of online surveys unless the respondents mirror the demographics, the makeup of the city. They can get monopolised by special interest groups and old fogies like me with time on their hands. I say next time you do a survey, set up a gazebo along Culver Street, stay in parks, earn a rise and reach out to a good cross section of the public. Use officers and students to do the paperwork, but councillors should take a turning man in these stands. You're all ward councillors. The decisions you make affect the whole town. All you have to do is be in listening mode. I'll leave it there. All right.
Thank you. I always welcome you coming to the table and saying what you have to say. I really appreciate it. The beauty is we also have Councillor Cox and Councillor Fox here tonight. I believe Councillor King is also, isn't he? Would you two like to come to talk? David, you're there, and Pam, if you'd like to come to the table just to listen. And then I think the next thing we do is go to the report from the officers. So you have been heard. I'm sure what the officers are going to say will reflect a lot of the points you've made.
Okay.
Thank you.
In that case, I will just very quickly add, I don't take a selfish view of things. I do a bit of homework. I do look forward and I don't tip around things. Nor do I wear rose tinted glasses.
I know.
Thank you.
That's as it is. I know.
Thank you, Chair. I might just position a report, if that's okay, before I pass across to my colleagues. So as you've seen in the report, the council's in the process of developing a new strategic plan, and we've had this period of consultation out to residents recently, in addition to undertaking some focus groups. And I know the panel were really keen also through their own work to hear from members of the public directly and businesses and stakeholders and get their views on the future of Colchester. So we did promote across our communication channels the opportunity to come tonight. I'm really grateful for Mr. Chilvers for coming along, to encourage people to come along and have an opportunity to speak to members directly. An additional opportunity, if you like, to those that were provided through the focus group and through the survey. And I believe colleagues or residents who attended the focus group or couldn't attend the focus group, sorry, were also given the opportunity to come along tonight if they wanted to. I guess bringing that together, the opportunity was hopefully for members to hear from residents. Apologies, Councillor Giles, is it my microphone? Is it to do with my laptop, maybe?
Sorry, was that a beep beeping sort of noise?
There's
I
yeah.
thought it was just me could hear that.
Apologies, Chair. I don't know
That's
whether
fine.
it's my.
I thought it was me.
Should we persevere? Sorry. Where was I? So obviously we want to take the opportunity for members to hear directly from residents if they were able to come along tonight, but also to give you an early sighter on some of the data and some of the themes and priorities coming out of the survey. Now, it's not a complete report. That is due to come probably later on in the month or early in the new year, of which it will be prepared to go to Cabinet. But we wanted to give you the opportunity to have an early sighter and to feed into that and to give you the opportunity to make recommendations in Cabinet that they may wish to consider on top of the evidence and the insight from the survey. So I'll pass across to my colleagues who kind of will run through a few slides I know that they've prepared, and we'll pick up on some of the key themes and priorities, if that's okay.
Yeah, can I just ask some of the points that Mr. Chilvers raised? After the presentation, you'll be able to address those, won't you? Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Tricia Smith and Mrs. Libby Britcher, and we both were tasked with a wonderful task of putting together some engagement, a survey and some discussion groups with members of the public. So they could be people that live or work in Colchester. So it wasn't sort of just restricted to people that live here. But we get the impression that most people did live in Colchester area. I'm going to start by taking you through some of the analysis from the quantitative questions that were asked, and also a very brief overview of some of the demographic information, which I know a lot of you are really interested in. And then Libby's going to talk you through some of the themes that came out of the survey, and how this helped to inform how we've structured the discussion groups. And then she'll briefly talk us through the themes that came out of the discussion groups, and some of the things that we just got round to do echo what Ms. Chilvers was just saying. So first of all, just wanted to address the point of how representative the sample we achieved was. So we got over 1,000 responses to the survey, which for a survey of this kind is actually a really good representation. Normally for this kind of survey, you say that a response rate from the public of about 1% is good, and that's kind of what we achieved. So we were really pleased with that. From the responses we got, there was some wards where there was an underrepresentation and some where there was an overrepresentation. But this is based upon the latest census data, and so population always changes, and also the information we have about who responds to surveys sort of indicates that you're always going to get a sort of section of society that answers them. But hopefully you can see from this visual here that we've got the general population is the sort of yellow or orangey line, which shows you the makeup of the borough in terms of each ward. And then you can see that for the areas Castle, Stanway, Lexington and Braeswick, and Newtown and Christchurch, and there were slightly more responses than we would expect to get in terms of the general population. And then some areas where there was a little bit of underrepresentation, which included Greensted, Mersey and Pyfleet, and the rural north. There is some other information about other demographics, but they're not included on the slides this evening. So in terms of gender, there was more females that responded to the survey. It was about sort of 60-30 split, but there was also quite a large proportion of people that preferred not to say what their gender was, and other people that said they were of an other gender. And it's not directly comparable with the census, because we don't ask the question in exactly the same way for this survey. Also, in terms of age representation, we actually had a pretty good representation of 25 to 34-year-olds, and unsurprisingly, people age 65 and over. The other age groups in between sort of 34 and 65 were a little bit underrepresented, but it was generally quite good. The age group that was not so good, which is quite common with this kind of thing, is people aged 18 to 24. So we did get some responses from them, but not as high as we would like, but it's like that for all kind of research that we do. I think that's all on the demographics for now. So I'll take you on to the first question that we asked. And there was a mixture of positive and negative. So we asked people what it felt like to live and work in Colchester, and how they felt about living in Colchester and the sort of sense of community that they have. Now, we did discover from the focus from the discussion groups, as Libby will highlight, that people's understanding of what community is different. So this is all dependent on how people interpreted the question. But it's fairly positive, with the majority of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing that they enjoy living or working in Colchester, and that's the yellow bars. And then less positive was that only 42% of respondents agreed that they felt a sense of community in the area of Colchester. And that is shown by the blue bars. And then just over half of respondents agreed that they would recommend Colchester to other people as a place to live or work. And that's on the green bars. Then we asked respondents to the survey to do something which is quite a difficult thing for people to do in a survey, but they've seemed to respond quite well. So we asked them to rank the current priorities that are in the current strategic plan by order of importance, and they did this by dragging and dropping the different priorities. If any of you have done the members version, it's the same sort of question as that you had. From that, we found that 60% of respondents felt that creating safe, healthy and active communities was their first or second priority. And you can see the next ones going on was growing a fair economy was second. The climate challenge was third, which was interesting, especially when we come to think about how the climate challenge has been quite a vocal thing on social media. And also we can see that delivering homes was ranked first, second by 28% of people. And then celebrating our heritage and culture was only ranked first or second by 23% of people. In the report, obviously, we can provide a breakdown for more than just first or second. We can look at third and fourth and what was ranked fifth. But for the purposes of today, we just wanted to show you what people ranked first or second and how many people did. Then going on to, before going on to the budget spend, we also asked people what other priorities they thought were important. And for this, town centre came out as a really strong area that, in terms of who answered the open question, 25% of people, if you were to count them up, mentioned the town centre. They would have mentioned other things as well, but this was mentioned by a quarter of people when asked what other things were important. And they said things like that we needed to revitalise the high street, that transformation of the city centre with a clear vision to address any decline caused by sort of wider market factors should be addressed. And there's some other comments there as well. There was some mentions of sort of crime and safety, but this didn't come out as strongly as it did in a previous survey that was done earlier in the year, which was dedicated to crime. People didn't tend to talk about it in this survey, really. Next slide. So in terms of budget spend, we also asked respondents to rank which areas that the council currently spends most money on, which things they thought the council should spend its money on, and how they would rank them in order of importance. And here we start to see a sort of disparity between what people want the council to have as its priorities and what they want the council to spend its money on, with over 85% of respondents ranking environment as the first or second area that they think the council should spend its money on. And then going down the table, we can see that 36% of people ranked parks and open spaces first or second in order of importance. And then sort of sadly for corporate services, that includes me and Libby, only 0.9% of people ranked us as first or second. And then in terms of what was ranked last, 71% of people ranked corporate services as 8th or 9th. So that was just a thing we wanted to add. And it's kind of interesting because what they're saying is that they in discussion groups as well was that they want sort of council oversight to remain, but with council oversight remaining, you need support staff to be able to do that. So that was really interesting. But you can see why environment would have been like, if they had to pick, that's like the main thing they want the council to spend money on. And I think that is it in terms of the quantitative closed questions that we asked. And then there were also a number of open questions. Libby is going to start to briefly talk you through some of the themes that came out of the qualitative comments, and then move on to tell you how that fed into the discussion groups. So over to Libby.
Hello, thank you. So I looked specifically at the open text boxes and themes that came out of those, and something to mention is that obviously people didn't mention just one thing. There was so much interlinking comments, you know, often when people mentioned the town centre, that often related to retail parks and possibly traffic and congestion. There was just so much interlocking. So although they are single lists, there's a lot of kind of overlap. So obviously something that has been mentioned is the town centre and the want and need and requirement for people for it to be regenerated and shops to be filled and pavements to be fixed and things like that. City status was a theme, and again the regeneration. In the specific open question about the city status, the 22% said the regeneration of the centre was really important, and the next was 21%. Again, a lot. It wasn't as if 22% of people didn't say one thing and 21% of another thing. There will be an overlap of those figures there. And of the people that answered the question, not everyone did. 13% of those said a negative comment towards Colchester becoming a city. It was a slightly leading question in that it said, what priorities do you see will come? So then to come back with it was things like it's a vanity project, what a waste of money, you know, quite negative things like that were said. Those 13% of people said that. That's not to say that the remaining 87% were positive about it, though, just to make you aware of that. Retail parks were mentioned and highlighted as having a detrimental effect on the centre, whether that was taking money away in the big shops from the centre or traffic, things like that. Youth inclusion was mentioned in terms of the youth being our future and trying to encourage them to be more involved. The next slide, please. Transport was mentioned, whether that's green transport, whether that was traffic, bicycle lanes. It's quite a broad topic. Infrastructure, and specifically new developments and the lack of infrastructure that supported those developments, such as GP surgeries, roads, schools and other things, other infrastructure. Tourism, culture and heritage. It was really apparent that people really wanted to have pride in Colchester, but that really appeared to be lacking by a number of people in those open text boxes. And then finally, climate and environment was really important. People were really passionate about it. And one thing that I did notice was that although people were passionate about it, a number of people did say that you know, in this day and age, cars need to be accepted and that we should try working with them and not against them. From those themes in the survey, we then focused the discussion groups, and the topics that we covered in those were empowering communities, young people empowering and owning their city status, environment including waste and recycling collections, facilities including sport and leisure around Leisure World, museums, parks and open spaces. And I'll just point out that those two topics, they weren't actually themes from the survey, they were themes that we were asked to include in the focus groups as an addition. They did come up, but they were kind of an addition. The town centre and out of town retail parks. So I'll give you a really quick overview of the discussion groups. They were informal, and we wanted everyone to feel like they could really kind of voice their opinion. We encouraged people to disagree, but we obviously said that they must respect other people's opinion, because if everyone had the same opinion, you guys would have such an easy job and it would be so boring. So, you know, we really tried to make sure that people respected but really did voice their opinion. We had posters on the walls, people put post-it notes up, or we frantically tried to scribble down what they said and we put them up for them. So the first topic that I'll go over is communities and owning their areas. People were very passionate that it is important to them and it is possible. but it must be joined up across the council. It must be done you know, in a similar way across different wards or areas or communities, whatever that community is. They were worried that the same people in each community might get kind of lumped with doing the same jobs, and then you know the usual things that come up. It was important that we don't just do a day-to-day approach to this, and we do a long-term and focus on the future of how it would look to make sure it all works and is joined up. And it needs to be simple and easy for the people that are involved. Empowering young people, some ideas that came out from empowering the young people here was the idea of youth champions and potentially a youth council, and the attendees like the idea of possibly going into schools and educating people and getting people really, you know, really empowered and understanding what they could do. It was mentioned that sometimes young people, when they have an idea, they kind of were shot down. So an example that we were given in the community was a young gentleman, I'm not sure, was he about 20, maybe younger, 18 or 20, and he put on a Facebook community group, does anyone want me to do some safety awareness courses for e-scooters? And he had hundreds and hundreds of comments about how they were unsafe, how they were a nuisance, and all those kind of things. And he didn't then continue, and he just kind of slowly didn't say anything and didn't do anything. Yeah, so it was, you know, kind of shot down, and you know, that's just one example that we were given on the day. There was thought that the young people may not know how to express something they're passionate about or that they want to do, and that as a council we often don't use the right channels to empower them or to communicate with them. But then by the end of the conversation, it came about that actually, do these young people want to be empowered? Do they want to be included? And we're not sure. So really we would need to go speak to those people about it. Outsourcing facilities was the next topic of discussion, and that was specifically around whether attendees at the two discussion groups would be happy with the likes of museums, you know, and the castle, Leisure World, and any other facilities, and those being outsourced. And we asked two questions, the first of which was, is it important to you that these facilities are council run? And everyone, I think bar one person, said yes. When we asked if it would stop them coming, however, they said no. And we had a bit of a discussion. So initially we kind of explained about how the council are really limited in terms of budgets and resource, and you know, is that our best time well spent? Is it our best time doing, you know, running these facilities? It came about that everyone really liked that they were council. They felt that they could trust them, and there were some really, really positive comments about Leisure World. And it's really important that if they were outsourced, that the council had final oversight, and because they were really worried that if they potentially went private, profits would be really high importance, and they just wouldn't be the things that we like at the moment. So they felt happier that the majority of people said that they would be happy for these to be outsourced potentially, but they would be much happier if they were outsourced to a not-for-profit company and the council still had final oversight. They didn't kind of just wash their hands of them and say, you know, bye-bye. They still managed and have oversight, and the TfL is a really good example of how that is done really well. City status was a topic that we spoke about. We asked people what they felt other cities had that maybe we didn't, what opportunities there were, and everyone felt it was really important that Colchester had its own identity. And although we are a city, there's no need to rush and, you know, keep up and quickly do lots of changes. We are Colchester, and we should be proud to be Colchester. But saying that we should look to cities for inspiration, but we should also make the most of our differences. There was acknowledgement that the town centre may change as to how people think a town centre should be. A lot of people think a town centre maybe should be shops and shopping and things like that, but you know, potentially there would be housing. There was mention of experience days and how people would go to Chelmsford and they wouldn't go shopping in Chelmsford. They would spend a whole day there and they would do some experience days and they would go for dinner and some drinks and maybe they'd go shopping, but that wasn't kind of always their priority. But making the most of our heritage was mentioned as something that was really important, and how we have it all on our doorstep and we really need to, you know, utilise it. The next topic is town versus retail parks. We asked them two questions. Well, first of all, we asked what would entice you to come to town, and then we asked people what would entice you to go to a real retail park. And initially, everyone wasn't very keen about retail parks, and we don't like retail parks, and we love town, and this is why we go to town. But after a bit more discussion, I think a lot of people realised that actually I do quite like a retail park, not for the same reasons. So retail parks, people like to, they're a bit more convenient, accessible, quick and easy to nip in and out, but town was more of an experience. So it wasn't, you know, retail parks were much more about the shopping, but town, although people wanted it to be more about the shopping, it often isn't anymore. And it is more about kind of more of an experience and having a coffee as well, maybe going for lunch and things like that. Some ideas and solutions for town and retail parks. So town was improved cycle routes, accessibility and the safety in car parks, charging points for electric cars, again, making more of the heritage, free parking. So there were ideas about how potentially if you, just different kind of marketing techniques to encourage people to use different things within the town and encourage them with free parking if they'd used the museum, for example. Lower rates for small or startup businesses, or maybe, you know, 2 months free, let them in, see how it goes and then start charging. Park and ride, that came up quite a lot, and how it could be moved because it's nice and easy to do that. And more business and working hubs in the town centre versus retail parks. Car parks limited in some areas. I think that was regarding the Stanway retail park and how it was sometimes a bit tricky to get in and out of. The old Sainsbury's as a potential site, I think that was mentioned for Park and Ride, is that right? Yeah. And potentially somehow trying to generate money in the retail park that could then feed back into the high street. So the next slide is an example of the visual aids that we used on the day to try and make it a bit more interesting, and, you know, to get people up off their seat and vote and put post-its up and things. So we didn't talk about this in a great detail. We put the posters up on the wall, and when there were breaks or when we were waiting to start, we asked people to vote. So the first question was, do you use our garden waste service? And everybody said yes. And would you be willing to pay? It was, as you can, well, it's quite small, but it was few people said no. There was a lot of maybes and there were a few yeses, and that was based on things like it really depended if people would potentially pay if they could put more bags out, or if they could do it more often and things like that. And the next question was, do you have a wheelie bin? Nobody in the room had a wheelie bin, interestingly. Do you want one? It was, as you can see, you know, a third each way. There was no clear winner on that one, so I'll leave that on with you. And then finally, do you recycle? So this was asked on the second day. All 16 people in the room said yes. So we initially asked the question, do you think more people would recycle if it could all be put in all items in one box together? It was a bit of a kind of a no-brainer. Obviously, yes, everyone would say yes, it's easier. So we continued with that discussion slightly. If we could just go on to the next slide, please. And I think what was really apparent was they said it would really depend on how much it cost the council either way, and they really wanted to do, they were willing to do whatever cost the council left, to save money. But I think that was, you know, the nature of the people in the room. People were already recyclers. So if we were asking people that didn't already recycle, the answer would probably be different. We were really keen on expanding the possibilities. You know, a number of people in the room, they would take all their empty crisp packets to the school gate, and because there's boxes in different areas, and they'd want to do toothpaste bottles, and then things like it being more convenient and clearer and easier obviously would encourage people more. And so the final slide, in terms of priorities, so conclusions, and the final slide, priorities and budget, as Tricia said, do not always align. So I think that was something that we found really interesting. The town centre, the high street was, a really hot topic, and the first group on the 15th of November, they wanted to talk about it all day. So we had to really try and kind of move them on to the other topics. It was mentioned by a few people that our priorities, they felt they could be lifted and put to any town or any city, and they felt that they really wanted our priorities to be really Colchester specific, and that Colchester needs to have a really clear identity, and they want to keep the money in the city. Communication. This came up in the survey as well. I think it's people just don't know who does what, whether that's what Colchester Council do, what Essex County do, what the ward councillors do, but also but also it was even within Colchester Council. We had a few examples of someone trying to stop some antisocial behaviour in the town centre, and they just felt they were sent from pillar to post. Even people didn't know where to go, what to do, and they just found that really, really frustrating. And also there was a number of times in the room where someone would raise an issue and said that this should happen, and then another resident in the room would go, actually that has happened, the council have done that. So even when we do things, we need to tell people what we're doing to make sure everybody knows. And one of those is using the right platforms for the right age groups, and trying to encourage, a number of ages and demographics to come and speak to us. And yeah, just general confusion about how the local democracy system runs was raised specifically in the second session. Community empowerment and engagement, siloed working across the council and wider initiatives, and who owns what. So that kind of does touch on what we've just spoken about, but things about all the different strategies that go on, they feel like they need to be aligned with the town deal and the strategic plan, and they feel like there's a lot of things going on that could and should be grouped together and managed in that way. Making things easier and clearer so residents don't give up. The example of the antisocial behaviour in town, I think they did just give up in the end, but they put up a fight, but they just felt like they didn't know where to go and what to do, and they just felt a bit like they needed to give up. And people were really keen about the survey and the focus. I need to stop calling them focus groups, the discussion groups that we held, and they were really keen to do more and engage more and tell us what they want. And then there's a residents panel that Tricia's leading on that a lot of people that have signed up for, I think, since. I think finally, the outsourcing of facilities I've touched on, and they're saying that they actually would be quite happy to do that as long as we didn't give all management and we still had oversight of everything. And don't be afraid to change and do things differently. And that is at the end. I don't know if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you, that was awesome.
Thank you.
Sort of like so much information.
There is so much to remember. It's really hard
to
your brain was
ping-ponging to budgets, priorities, and as you quite rightly said, some of it didn't align. But, and I saw the banner of the headline on the website about the residents.
Oh yeah.
And I've already started to promote that because I think that is a really, really good opportunity.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think, Owen, you have a statement to read, which I'd like for us to hear that, and then maybe Rory, you might like to say something, or would you like to take questions from the panel after the statement?
Yeah, should we hear the statement, and then I think it's for the panel to debate and ask questions and consider any recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from me. We received a statement from a member of the public, which I should have read out at the have your say point, but with your indulgence, I'll read that now. So, an apologies to Janet Williams, who submitted this for the panel's consideration. Ms. Williams writes, I'm unable to attend the meeting on 30th November. However, I would like to ask the panel about environment and refuse collection. People who have abandoned vehicles that have been left idle and not in use for a period of 2 years or more, please have them removed. I have 2 abandoned vehicles, untaxed and unused for 7 years outside our close. It is an eyesore and it's bringing down the house price in the neighbourhood. Why are people allowed to let vehicles rot on our doorstep just because they cannot be bothered to pay for its removal? Make this compulsory and encourage recycling scrap metal. Another point, is it necessary to have collections week after week, so many of them? Can't you just have one collection? People want to recycle, and that's good to keep it separate, but just one collection would surely be a cheaper option. Also, parking for shopping should be free. NCP car parks are too costly and are ripping off people who are otherwise now travelling to other towns to do their shopping. I travel to Lakeside, Bluewater, because it is free. End of statement.
Thank you. Rosa, have you any comments that you'd like to make to some of that statement?
In terms of the abandoned cars, yes, we do have powers to be able to do that. So what I might do, Owen, is just get the contact details and contact that resident and make sure that we're dealing with those.
Fabulous, thank you. Right, we have Speaker Sarah, you indicated first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always very interested in the evidence base. I think obviously it's going to be a foundation on which decisions are made. I'd very much like to understand more about some of the ways in which you gathered your sample, and also the maths behind the 1%. So what is the population of Colchester that is your baseline figure? And if you can just walk me through how you got to 1%.
Hi, so the last census showed the population at about 193,000, is that correct? No.
It's a contentious issue. It's 192, and then the digits changed round, so I can't remember which way it is, because the prediction was over what it.
Yeah,
what
the
it had
projection
turned out.
was over to what it was. So that's what we based putting the survey out to all residents. So it was, yeah, I can tell you exactly how it was done, but it was done via comms. But it was things on the website. It was all digital, and on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. So, but I can get that plan from comms if you'd like a breakdown.
Thank you. The reason I asked, I did some very quick and dirty maths, and it was substantially less than 1% where I got to if you do the maths with the survey responses. And as you got your discussion groups from your survey responses, it seems like an ever diminishing pool of views you're drawing from, and that genuinely concerns me. And to Mr. Chilver's point earlier, it's extremely important that we don't have digital first, which delivers a very narrow view about how we should set our priorities and how the council should set its strategy. That really, I'm quite concerned about that actually.
So we had 1,113 responses. 0.7% is seen as average and 1% is seen as good. Again, I can get you a kind of where that has come from. I completely agree, and ideally in an ideal world we would have done it in other ways as well as online, but in terms of resource that was kind of how we how we did it this time. I don't know if you want to take any more.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, in terms of like the way the sample was done, in this case, it was an opportunistic sample. So we, with the resource and time scale that we had, that is all we could do, really. In the future, if there's more of an appetite to have like a scientific randomized sample, which tries to be representative from the start, that is something we can look into, but it sort of takes more resource in terms of having to send invites out in the post and do it through a postal method. And we were working within the restraints of the online first, and didn't have, I don't think we had sufficient budget to be emailing every single resident, or sorry, not emailing, posting every single resident a letter to ask them to complete a survey. And we wouldn't be able to send a survey to every single household because I think the cost would be too high. And in terms of sending out a random sample, the question that I would probably ask in that sense is that because it's scientific, it gives everyone an equal chance of being asked to take part, but then there will be people that didn't get a chance to take part, and it then means that communication methods that we used would not be possible, because we wouldn't be able to do a general communication out to all residents to say, please complete our survey. And in that case, then the response rate might suffer. So it was kind of a toss up between, do we use a scientific sample and give everyone an equal opportunity to take part, but not everyone is able to, or do we follow the sort of mirror the democratic system? Arguably, I don't know, but do we mirror that and make it possible for anyone to complete it? And I suppose that's not really a decision that we would take ourselves. So yeah.
Yeah, I think David would like to come back, but before you do, I would just like to say I was really pleased to see the good response that you had from Stanway, because I did promote it on the various sites, and I just put a header, one-liner, and this is really important. And that obviously touched the nerve. And when I was talking to people, I was saying, it is online. You know, if mum or gran isn't online, make them aware. So I was quite pleased when I saw that Stanway had a good response. David?
First of all, my apologies to the panel and to you, Chair, that I couldn't join you earlier. So please excuse my remarks if they're off key with the earlier conversation before I arrived. I didn't want to say, it's not in defence, is it, but an explanation context for the work of Libya and Tricia. The way we looked at this was a supplement to the wider consultation, which was in the press, was talked about, press releases and stories were out there. Also went with the same but a wider survey to every member. And I personally went round 3 times just to encourage members to pick this up, to give it, as you did and some others did, in a busy life, give this some real airing locally. So I think from my perspective, if you add in members and what we've gained in terms of a slice of the public, taking the point that it may not be a perfect sample, it's still nonetheless a significant one, and work with stakeholders and with partners that we put this together with the panel's take as well, then I think that we've got a fairly rich picture, which will certainly help us in terms of looking at what we can do, how we shape, subject to full council's view, the strategic plan forward, on which we're making a number of endeavours, including the next few weeks, to ensure that members feel party to this and in a collegiate way. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Tricia and Libby, for that comprehensive submission. I know the other night I had a few queries. I was interested that Mr. Chilvers asked the question about demographics, because I was keen to ensure that the demographics reflected roughly what we had across the city. If I can just help you out a little bit with Councillor Naylor's query, the 2022 census stats suggest that 126,176 individuals are aged between 16 and 64. So you are right when you say it's about 1%. It's not far off when we have over 1,100 responses. I would also add that YouGov do their polling wholly online, and nobody queries the veracity of the polls that they publish on a frequent basis. So although I recognise that some people do find it difficult to participate digitally, I think what you've done is that most of what you've taken, you've not only just used the digital responses, but you've also had those face-to-face discussions with people that help to inform what those digital responses were. So I think that's really interesting. And I think even though it may not be perfect science, it gives us a pretty good idea of what most of the population of Colchester want to see this city council doing for their environment. And when I say environment, I'm talking about the whole of the environment. I'm not just talking about the climate challenge. I think the interesting one for me is around public transport. I point out all the time that 60 miles down the road, there is an excellent system of public transport, which is publicly overseen, publicly delivered in the main, is relatively inexpensive, is frequent, and is mostly safe and clean. And that's what people want to see. I mean, you can tell by my accent that it's been a few years since I lived in my home part of the country, but I always remember the good old Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, and the public transport system that was there was fantastic. People used it. It was cheap, it was regular, it was efficient. And the only way that we will get people back onto public transport is by having public oversight and public management of public transport. That's why I think some people feel that the car is the be all and the end all. But I think if you provide people with a bus that turns up within reasonable walking distance every 20 to 30 minutes and is a lot less expensive to use, they will use it very quickly. As far as wheelie bins go, Mr. Chilvers, I think we made a mistake a few years ago when we, as a local authority, decided to carry on with a mixed bag of refuse collection. And I've been saying for ever since then, and I'll say it again tonight, we need to roll out wheelie bins as quickly as we possibly can across the whole of the town. And that's a decision for the whole council to take, and I hope that it won't be too long before we do. I was keen that these slides were sent out to all members of the panel before this evening, because I know there is a lot of detail in there for us to pick apart. And I'm thankful that we did have that. But what for me comes across from this is that the residents who participated in these surveys, and I'm sure that any resident who didn't participate would say likewise, is that there is a need for a sense of place about Colchester City, that it is different. We do have some unique aspects in Colchester. As well as growing up in South Yorkshire, I spent a little over a year living and working in Chester. And Chester has faux history and has made a lot of that faux history to attract tourists. We have real history in Colchester, and we need to do something to market that real history and to encourage the residents of Colchester to appreciate what we have here. The final thing I wanted to come to is just about the recommendations, Chair, if I might. And I just think the recommendations are fairly woolly this evening, but I'd like, before we finish this evening, to actually put down some markers, make some suggestions, and also ensure that, bearing in mind Councillor Naylor's point, that we give residents one last bite of the cherry to come back and talk to us perhaps at the next policy panel meeting, should they so wish. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to slightly rain on the parade, really, I suppose. The problem is that this is such a sweeping, wide-ranging survey, and in many ways, in its topics, I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Smith in that, you know, my understanding is just about 200,000 people in Colchester, and 1,000 of those is 0.5%. But, you know, well, it's somewhere near that, probably is. We're always lagging behind, and LGA surveys, well, yes, we agree with them and they're favourable and we like them. And when we don't, we disagree with them. I believe it's Stephen Shakespeare, isn't it, who ran that? Now, the issue, of course, is that we're a clone town and it's getting worse. Now, Mr. Chilvers, you may have been here a while, I don't know. I'm very local, been here since about 1200, my family have. And I'm almost local. And when I look at the things like Owen Ward's, Berriman's, Upchurch, Ratcliffe's, David Cooper's, Jacqueline's, these were all the indicators that make Colchester a place where you actually want the market. Yeah, there was a market. Well, actually, where Williams and Griffin's is used to where the sheep pens were. This is some antique old fogey telling you what Colchester was like. So you could argue then, why do I not come and shop in Colchester? I get a Bury St Edmunds or Norwich. Why? Because this is, you can get it anywhere. Where's Tiny's in Red Lion Square gone to? Where are the higgledy-piggledy bits that Councillor Bob Richardson asked for years ago? Where's the heart of the place? What is it that makes people come here? And the other thing is, this doesn't seem to relate in any way at all to my village, Mersey. City-centric. Borough, you know, it's town centre, effectively. What are my people going to do for park and ride? They're going to drive through Colchester to it. It's wonderful. What do my kids want to do if they want to go to the leisure centres up there? Can't get a bus. They drive to it. Effectively, what we're doing is we're putting too much emphasis just on the centre. I know Councillor Bentley will say more about this. Why is it that we have a GP surgery on Mersey that was built in 1953 and it's never been expanded for 8,000 people? These are the things that people look at. What they want is not necessarily a concentrate, they want a fairness. And also, I absolutely agree with, I think someone's mentioned it, is that we should have the capacity to give start-up rates or small individual traders rate relief. Because we can't attract any of these things that make Norwich so wonderful. You know, I don't know. I just think we destroyed Crouch Street. This was once the premier shop street in North Essex. And it's disappeared. I don't know how many of you are local, actually. I'm just wondering that. I can see Mr. Chilvers nodding. So my view is that what it's done is it's picked out some interesting topics. And I think we need to kind of chunk it now and look much more closely into them. The issue about the high street, absolutely agree. I mean, I think it's now the last 30 years I've been asking for some trees to be planted in the blasted street. And you've only got to go to Clacton or Frinton and you'll see it's been done there. Now, maybe I'm biased as I used to work in France a lot. Every town centre had trees. Do you know, I can remember the tree outside the town hall being planted. I was a councillor. That's how long ago it was. And it's brilliant. It sort of shows up the Eurolift. You don't know what that is, do you? Oh, you do, Leslie. Yes, there's a pop-up urinal that comes out of the pavement next to it. I'm sure that it fertilises the tree very well. What I'm saying is there needs to be some more individuality, and that ties into making it a more attractive place to come to. What is it that draws people here? You will get a certain number of tourists who will come for the historical visits, you know, for the castle and First Sight. I mean, how we welcomed First Sight as a council, didn't we? We were all absolutely over ourselves in enthusiasm.
Some of us were.
Exactly.
Others still councils.
Others, yeah, exactly. You know, so we need to look at what is it that makes a place user-friendly, and therefore people can identify with it. If we could jump on a train and go to London, you're going to get better shopping than you get here. What have we got and what have we lost? What is it that we really need to concentrate on? And apropos of free parking, well, you know, years ago, I can remember we had free park 40. Don't suppose anyone here can remember that, can they? You got 40 minutes, so you can go on to paying at the bank. Not anyone ever does that these days, or go to the library or whatever. You've got 40 minutes free parking. But we're obsessed with income. How much did we make out of parking last year? £685,000. Do you know there is an argument for giving a bit of free parking to attract people in? And as for out of town retail parks, well, why wouldn't you? You're not going to lug the stuff to your car. You're not going to pay £8 a day or whatever it is in Willie G. No, I can't call it Willie G's anymore, can I? But what do you do when you get somewhere where it's so popular that the big store, which is Sainsbury's, has 785 parking spaces, and the new Stayne Park Retail, which has got Marks and Spencer's, B&Q, Lidl, Cook, 480. Anyone tried to find a parking space up there? And you could say, no, you can't, that's dreadful. But actually it shows how popular it is. And we're not looking, are we? We're not looking at what people really want. They want an experience in the town centre now. They're not coming in here for a major grocery shop. They're just not going to do it. So what do we provide as an alternative? So it's a bit of a rant, isn't it, really? But basically what I'm saying is that we need to look at the results. And congratulations to you both. You've done really well. And you didn't really deserve me ranting at you. But having said that, we need to look at more specifics at what we can do, what is viable. I mean, we're going to come on to it, I know. We've got the quay, we've got the river. For the last 30 years, I've been asking for something to be done. Well, we put a bit of street furniture in, but it's still a clogged up, mud-ridden shopping trolley dump. And yet, it is one of the great assets. What do we do with it? Just to give you an example, when Tesco's was built, they had to put a new turning circle with the ships, opposite where the student accommodation is, because the ships couldn't get through the new bridge. It cost £1 million. Do you know how many ships used it? 1. Is that how we really want to run a thriving, bustling city? Anyway, sorry about all that, but yeah, and I don't expect an answer from you at all, but my suggestion is look more closely at the specifics. And one final thing is that if you ask any question about the environment, you are going to get a cadre of people who are comfortable with computers, who have very strong views, and they will reply to it. The vast amorphous mass of not real people, how could I say that, of other people won't. You miss them. Thanks very much.
Do you feel better now, John? Excellent. I mean, what we've got to remember is this is the starting point. You know, it's getting the information, asking the questions to see what comes back, and then depending on what comes back, that steers the next direction. And the next person is Councillor Bentley.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, well done. I mean, this is a huge piece of work that has been undertaken, and it's a thankless task because you can ask any question like, and you can either skew it to the answer you want or an open question where you get answers you don't understand as well. So well done. And the industry within this is superb. So thank you. I just want to ask a few points, and I'll keep it to the survey. So we talked about this about culture stuff. Culture is one place in this vast city limits we now have. And so Councillor Giles is right about I live on Mersey, I represent a rural ward. This is not really talking to me. I don't think. It's not criticism, it's not observation. And I noticed in your chart, very few of the rural areas took part. So naturally, that is going to skew the answers you're going to get. Mr. Chilvers gave a presentation, I think, pretty much all about the city centre. Had it been someone from another part of the city, such as Winhoe, such as Mersey, such as Boxted, such as Peldon, you might have got a slightly different response to it. So I think we need to have another go. I'm with previous comments about having another go at this and just trying harder and using different sources. So in terms of getting hold of people, of course, we do have the council tax database email. We should be using that. I pay my council tax via email. I pay my bill via email. You've got that data. I'm sure we're allowed to use that. I don't, this one does, we're not. Then we could use that. And we could do drop-in sessions. We can't use that. We can't use that. So I think just check that, because we hold the information. We held the information, okay. So, but we should check that. It's another method of, and I get emails from the City Council all the time as I've logged into the system on here. So you must hold my information. That's a way to communicate. Anyway, that's one method. Another method, of course, we do have libraries in some areas, Stanway, Mersey, there's others too. We could use that as drop-in sessions. We could use that. So I think giving people who can't necessarily fill out a computer form, might have the wherewithal to do that, could take part in the survey as well. Other points that you want to make is in that information, what people want. I just wanted to understand, did we explain the current budget and how we invest their money into this city? So without that understanding, what you have is a wish list. Because I noticed in all of that waste collection wasn't there. It is one of the biggest spends this council does, yet people didn't mention it. So I think it's important that we do explain as part of the preparation to this, how the budget is, how their money is currently invested in the services they receive. I'm a great believer that no council, no authority has money, it has the taxpayers' money, and the dividends they receive as shareholders of the services we provide. So I think we just need to explain that a little better where it currently is. Otherwise, you just end up with a great wish list of what we'd like, things we can never deliver because we don't have the budget for it. And boy, right now we don't have the budget for it because we're trying to make savings the best way we can. Also, it's about understanding our audience. So it's a great breakdown of people we had there and ethnicity, but geography is also important, as I mentioned. So knowing the audience and what their needs and what they want. I do agree earlier about the idea of having better public transport. You'll get that when we're a transport authority. When we have devolution in this county, you'll have a transport authority who will get better control of public transport. So that's just a comment I wanted to make there. And also, I just think in terms of the question on infrastructure, people want more infrastructure. I think we've got to understand in our planning system, we have got to talk to planners about this, about what we want. I don't ever recall, in my 20 years now, I was sitting down talking about what is the plan for this place called then the Borough of Colchester, now the City of Colchester. What we've got, and it's not necessarily our fault because of housing, silly housing targets imposed upon councils, is we have to fulfill those without any sense of community infrastructure that goes with it. We have to backfill all the time. We've never really done a schematic of what we think this looks like the Romans did 2,000 years ago. They built it, we knew what it was. Now we don't, it kind of keeps growing, which then leads on to my final point. I don't think there is such a thing as one city centre now. And there are three. This is the historic city centre. There is Stanway, and there is Northern Gateway. In a city of our size, the ambitions we have and the growth we have, nearly 200,000 people, and will continue to grow, it can no longer have one city centre. Birmingham doesn't really have one centre, there's a place which is the historic city, London ditto. So I think if we get into that mindset and explain, I keep looking at you, sorry, I'm addressing everyone here, by the way. It's if we get into a mindset that this place has changed, it's not 1953, it is the year 2023. We need to be thinking about the year 2053. And then the very final point is people want to have better environment, better air quality, and they want to ease congestion, but they want to drive their car. We have to explain why the latter is not possible if you want to have better air quality, electric cars or otherwise. If you want to have easy access into either or three city centres, the car is one option, it's not the main option. We have to provide better alternatives. I absolutely agree with that. You can't force people out of cars until there's a cheaper, more reliable, better alternative. And that's where we need to focus on this work. Now, that's also a bit of a ramble, I apologise. I think on this, and one of the recommendations I would certainly like to see and put forward and would vote for, is that this is a good start. I think we need another go at this, involving more people from rural areas and involving more younger people as well as older people as well. So that's an easy perspective, and then come back. And then, of course, what that will help the Cabinet with is form the budget setting for next year. Because the plan, the budget must follow the plan, not the plan following the budget. And then we must be open and honest with people to explain where we currently spend money and where we can't invest money at the moment as well. And so I kept looking at you and I didn't mean to, but very good though. Excellent, a great start.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Did you consult or did you send this out thinking about the rural areas to the town councils and the parish councils?
I believe part of the common strategy was to do that, yes.
Okay, and do you know what sort of response you got?
We'll check, Leslie, in terms of the comms plan and where this went. I know, you know, it's obviously not the intention to be Colchester city centre centric. I know the comms in terms of the social media channels and the press releases. The intention behind that is that it met a wider audience in terms of geography, but I think the points made this evening are excellent ones. So we'll take that on board. Trish has already mentioned the residents panel, which is something that is going to be set up and moving forward. I think, again, I'm hearing we need ongoing dialogue with residents and giving them an opportunity. What will be really interesting is to see the demographic of people who attend that. Young people, we're hearing, you know, need representation, the geographical areas in terms of representation from the communities outside of the immediate city centre. So I think all of those things are things that officers can take away to make sure that kind of the data that we're gathering is more insightful.
Just very quick, I agree. Can we just drop the word just Colchester, because that's going to be off-putting to other people. No, I understand why it's there. It's an observation. I just think if we start thinking about the wider Colchester area, I think was talked about, or the wider city area, whatever you talk about, Colchester is one place in the city limits.
I've never seen so many hands go up all at once then. Paul, you're next, but I think Pam, you wanted to come in with something in response to something.
I do, but I want to give you an update if I can on city status and pick up some of these points. So I don't know if that's an appropriate time to do it now or whether there's a separate point in the meeting.
Let the panel come
Okay.
up with their questions, because there might be another golden nugget that comes out that you will want to address. Paul?
Thank you very much. I'm too a little concerned about the people who did not respond to the survey. Looking at the areas, it was quite clear that the further you were away from the geographical town centre, it declined. Greenstead was an outlier, but Greenstead has a very, very young demographic compared to many other wards. And it's quite clear that the young people were being left out on the surveys there. I think your first age group started at, was it 22 or 20? 18. Now, there are 45, 50,000 people living in Colchester below that age, many of whom are going to be vital for the future of Colchester. Equally, and I'm going to have a minor go at Councillor Pearson here, you refer to the population of Colchester for those aged between 20 and 64, I believe. Well, on behalf of Councillor Jowers and myself, I feel it's a bit rough to ignore the further 40,000 of us who are over that age group in getting to the statistics. So coming back to Sarah's point there, I too think the figures that we've got for the response rate is probably nearer the 0.6%. But those are clearly areas that we need to work more at to get some input and involvement in, because they're going to be key for the future of what we're doing on here. I'm going to avoid making comments on some of the other points about the interest of devolution and what's being done on wheelie bins and what have you. Suffice it to say that I wasn't at all surprised that if you stuck a chart up on the wall and said, put a sticker on there saying how many of you have been good today, we're all going to be putting our hands in the good box, and none of us are going to have the courage to go up and say, actually, I don't recycle at all, but I don't want everyone else to know that. Thank you very much. But I think there's some further work that we need to be doing on getting the consultation in there. But this is about, as I see it, the centre of the city of Colchester, and the area that's having the biggest problems at the moment is the bit that we're in at the moment, the historic city centre. That's the bit that people are concerned about the lack of growth and lack of possibilities and what have you. And finally, so I've had to go at everyone else. I suppose it's only fair I had a word with Councillor Jow as well. Business rates, small business rates. Yeah, the government already gives relief for small businesses. Rent, I would definitely agree with you on that landlords need to accept a much more reasonable attitude on there. But as far as rates is concerned, the council actually has a really good record on distributing small business rate relief.
Thank you. Your turn. You've been so patient.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just really like to thank everyone involved with this, because of how much time and effort has gone into this research, and I know how lengthy these sorts of projects are. I've just got a few points initially around the survey. I just was curious whether there was any room for things like focus groups or discussion groups to bring in sort of people from the underrepresented groups, or was that not possible because you were just drawing on those who responded to the survey online? But that is sometimes a good way to kind of increase responses from particular segments. Professionally, I work with older people, and I know many of them have sort of digital exclusion and those issues. And so I am always really keen for these processes to be as inclusive as possible. However, I understand the kind of balance of costs and time. So, you know, if things like this can be publicised in the press, that will hopefully draw attention. But perhaps if there's any sort of drill down work in the future, there could be scope for sort of outreach events, perhaps in areas that were less well represented. Moving on to the issue I know about the residents panel and involving younger people, for example, I think that's really critical, because if young people aren't engaged, the citizens of the future just won't want to take part and help shape their communities. I know that many schools and colleges encourage us to have school councils. So I don't know, in terms of the scope of the residents panel, if there's scope to have a section for younger people. And rather than say a Colchester-wide, you know, young person's council, perhaps there could be representatives from existing school councils as a sort of shortcut. And then I'd just like to make a couple of points really about the actual survey itself and some of the themes. And I actually went back to residents as well and made them aware that I was attending this meeting, was asking for any extra views on top of their earlier responses to the survey. And people were expressing the importance, again, echoing the survey findings about the importance of open spaces and parks and protecting those. But also residents were concerned, echoing again conversations here this evening, about problems with the roads and traffic and parking issues. And I think this sort of feeds into wider discussions we need to have around communications with residents, because we need to balance those and educate people about the use of things like park and ride and public transport as well. And lastly, residents also wanted me to express views on the importance of having a good infrastructure in place, particularly, you know, with newer developments. I represent Highwoods, and of course that's still fairly new, probably in terms of the history of culture, still a new area. And we're lucky we have lots of really good schools and facilities. And, you know, I'm also very supportive of work we have ongoing, for example, in terms of supporting the new St Mark's Community Centre in the future, because I know that having those sorts of community facilities really help embed and engage newer residents. And I think it's really important to always reach out and welcome our newer residents as well as those that have been here for many years. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Right, that's all the list of speakers. Oh, come on then, have another go.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. It's such an important subject we've got here this evening, and I want to echo that this is a good start, but I agree with the recommendation that more needs to be done in order for these decisions to be based on strong evidence. So I just wanted to make 2 points. You referenced infrastructure comments, and a lot of people spontaneously in qualitative responses talked about infrastructure being inadequate. So you've quantified the number of people that spoke about the city centre as being 25%, 22%. How have you quantified the number who spoke about infrastructure? What is that number?
I won't be able to tell you off the top of my head. So the final report will be done by the end of this year, beginning of next, where there'll be a much further breakdown about all the open text boxes. It was a theme that was noticed, and the town centre was by far the biggest theme, which was why it was put in. The comment about, I think it was the 21 and 22% about city centre and heritage, that was very specifically the city centre question, and that was the theme in that question. So all the other open text boxes, they haven't been themed in terms of figures and that's
Thank you. And a second point. So the residents panel, I'd be really interested to know the detail of how the scoping of that has been done and the efforts that are being undertaken to ensure that that is truly representative and isn't just self-selecting. Because if we continually have self-selecting groups, then we're in an echo chamber of a group of self-selecting people, and that will intuitively drive strategy in the wrong direction. As a councillor, that's not something I want to do.
Yeah, the aim for that is one, to engage with, just trying to respond to some of the other comments that have come up, is to engage with pre-existing community groups that we know about to try and get a really representative sample. Obviously, there is still the potential there of an echo chamber because those people that are engaged with those groups are the people that are genuinely engaged. So, but we're going to try and work really hard with those groups to increase, unheard voices. The very nature of being unheard, so unknown, which is quite difficult. But also in terms of once we've got expressions of interest, my hope is we get an overwhelming expression of interest, and I'll be able to select people to sort of have a further screening questionnaire once there's people have showed an interest in it. But also the idea would be that it would be that people can, if there's a particular topic, that it could be targeted to people that's more relevant to. So if it's a topic that is more important to accessibility, then we want to get representation from people that is more important to on that specific event. And at the moment, the events, the aim is to make them more online and more sort of informal. But in terms of sort of wider outreach, again, we're going to need some help with that, and we're going to be working with the community enabling team and all of the contacts that they have to try and to get that outreach. And I suppose the only other thing is when we get more staff.
I think before we go further, I think Rory, you were indicating that you had an answer.
Not an answer to that question. It was more of a point, really. So thank you to both of you, and members have thanked you this evening for your excellent presentation. You've given this a whole load of work. I just wanted to make the point, really. Tricia and Libby have been given parameters within which to work. They've been given a task. They've been given a timeline, and they've delivered on what they've been asked to do. What we're hearing clearly is, maybe through recommendations that the panel might want to make, is to continue with this dialogue, look at expanding our opportunity to seek the views of residents from communities across our place. That's something we'll take away. That's something I know Cabinet have heard this evening as well. So I'm sure panel will be making that in a recommendation. But I just wanted to make the point, colleagues here have worked within specific parameters and they've done an excellent job. And I know you've said that, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowers.
Thank you, Leslie. And absolutely, that you've done what you were asked to do, but what it does is it sets loads of hairs running, doesn't it? And, we have local magazines in all the rural communities. There's one particular group reaches 37,000 homes, and they're easy to, they'd put it in for nothing because it's of local interest. And equally, an awful lot of parishes, which weren't mentioned in this at all, have done village appraisals or in their local plan. There's data there which you can pick up. I'd also like to thank Paul, and on behalf of both of us, is that no taxation without representation. If I'm over 64, damn it, I want my say as well, which I am considerably, I can assure you. And in response to Mr. Chilvers, I don't know if you remember, we actually set up a stand outside River Island some years ago with Andrea, and actually attacked people as they came by and asked them the questions. Do you remember that, Richard? Were you here with us then? No, probably not. Might have been. And anyway, we all stood out there and people told us what they thought we wanted to hear. Doesn't that sound strange? So there are other ways of looking at things, but no, congratulations on what you're doing. I just think it needs to be more specific now.
Thank you, councillor Law.
This is going back now, a point. I was just sort of wanting to go back to a point that Councillor Naylor made about in terms of trying to get the statistics for I think about the points around infrastructure, which I believe came from the open text boxes. And I know, having worked in research myself, it can be very difficult with these sorts of surveys because you want to give people some open text boxes so they don't feel they're kind of rammed into certain responses. But it's very difficult because it's easier giving those quantitative breakdowns because you've got that firm statistical basis, whereas you have to kind of use judgment, and sometimes it can be harder with those bringing out those qualitative themes. But the thing is, for ease of reporting, you do have to group them together. So I think it's important to bring those in, even though it might not always seem as easy, you know, there's sort of such hard and fast data. It's really important to have richness of the qualitative views. That's all.
Thank you. Chris, were you about to quickly indicate then? No, I was going to ask if it's all right with the leader, if councillor Cox comes in, and because she was indicating earlier, and then maybe the leader or Rory, do you want to go follow councillor Cox?
Always glad to see social science methods in action, and those social science degrees paying off, I'm sure. And you're right, any survey needs a close attention to its methods, and there's always opportunities for survey boosts and sample boosts, and it's never an end point with the survey. It's constant consultation, isn't it? And I think on that note, for me, the policy panel is very keen on public engagement, particularly under Leslie and Chris's leadership. I know it's very key. And for me, the survey gives us an interesting steer on certain key issues. And the ones I want to talk about in particular are the ones connected to city status, if I may, which would be that we've very interesting steer then on that idea of sense of place. People are keen on the idea of a historic centre. And I think Councillor Bentley makes a very good point about perhaps us needing to develop a dialogue about three town centres and having a dialogue around that's right. Correct. Slap. We need a swear box, don't we? City swear box. At the historic centre, I think we need a narrative around the historic centre and all that comes, including brown signs on the A12, if I may say. But I think that I want you to be assured that those of us who are involved quite closely in city status planning will take this on board very seriously, with all the caveats that have been expressed tonight. And I wanted to just add in a couple of other points just to reassure you too that there's a democracy in schools idea afloat. There's a bid going in, the Mercury are involved. I don't want to say too much more about it in case the bid doesn't come to fruition, but that's definitely on the radar, which might help to cover that issue off about consulting and being led, not listening to young people, being led by them, actually, I think in many respects. That's one I wanted to say. The other, shall I just briefly say something around an update on city status? Is this the moment to do it?
Go for it, Pam. I'm
going to go for it because I need to leave, if that's all right. So we've had the council meeting. It went brilliantly. Fantastic. That was the first part of the three-pronged approach. Second part is the year of celebration. There is an announcement coming out from our tourism heritage culture leads, as in Claire Taylor and team, very soon. I don't want to preempt it here because otherwise it won't be a launch of those events, but there are some big ticket tourist facing events which will be being released imminently. They're going into a press. Some of you would know about some of them. There's a focus on heritage and culture, but there's also a focus on events beyond the town centre, which I think is important. So it won't be the only things happening. They're the things that are the bigger ticket tourist facing events that we hope will bring people into town. There's also another layer to it, which is the community facing part. And I know this panel is very keen that there is community facing and community generated ideas as well, but not necessarily tourist facing, but community facing. So things like the Beer Church Dyke, A panel is going up in January. For example, there's St Leonard's in the Hythe will be involved in work around commemoration of the siege, the church there, the School Democracy Project, which I've mentioned. There's at the event last week at City Status celebration, I met someone from the Wakes Colne Parish Council who is doing something around Wakes Colne local history. Peter Chillingworth was involved with that as well. So there's these things that are bubbling up from the ground, which I think will also come through the survey. So you've got your tourist facing stuff, your community facing work, and I think there's lots of opportunity there. And then on the third plank of it is the legacy planning, and perhaps I'll let David speak to that. But we're getting together with Lindsay Barker, David and I and others to think about the legacy planning. So I'm confident it's going ahead really well. It's ticking the boxes that you asked us to tick, and in particular having an emphasis on public engagement. So happy to take any questions on it as well, but also I know time is short.
Fabulous. I love the thing that the ideas are bubbling up.
Yeah.
That's so important. That's really good. Not tick box, but that's really excellent to hear. David, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just go back a bit and remind colleagues of what we said we would do at policy panel, which was have open conversations in which the promise was, unless the circumstances did not allow, that we would do some listening. And I hope you've seen some listening going on tonight. I'm really grateful that we've acknowledged within the parameters set cracking work by hard-pressed people who've now got an extra bit of tasking. I think we're likely to agree. We'll have a look at how and when we can do that. But please allow me to just reinforce the point I made earlier. This is a contribution, important one, to the rich picture we need. And yes, let's go back and see. I absolutely take the pointed bit geography, and I love your reference. Glad to hear from the leader of Essex County Council that we should be talking about 3 city centres, because it puts into context many of the conversations we keep having in the narrow way around the high street. This is the future is going to be different as the master planning, for which I want to say publicly again to you, Kevin, a big thank you for playing such a big part in, is going to take us to the point where we can unveil more of that and then hopefully deliver it. Real things are what matters. There is a context for us which we mustn't lose sight of, which is we're going through the toughest of times, are we not, in budget terms? So we've got hard choices. This does not devalue the work that's been done and what else we might add to it. It means that we'll be taking into account whatever we can when we make those choices. And I can tell you now already to the 2 of you that we're already thinking about, well, from the early results, how does that play when we look at those difficult choices? So I want to thank the panel again. Please continue to do what you're doing. We'll continue to take away and act on whatever we can, because we're the better for doing it together. Thank you for your work too. So next steps will follow. But for you as important figures in your own parties, there is something about reminding your colleagues, please, to also act in the same kind of spirit of, here is a reasonable challenge, a request for data and information. You and your colleagues, our fellow members, are part of that putting together with stakeholders and partners, not just those who are good enough, the 0.5% or 1%, whatever they may be, of whatever age, who've taken the time and trouble to contribute. I think we should look at it as a positive. Over 1,100 people have taken the trouble to go through what is a bit complicated. There's always a balance about this. We make it more data enriched, but then we'll lose people who don't want to go and do it. So I think we've made a cracking start. I thank you. I ask you to, when we go round this again, to encourage fellow members to respond, because when it was when I last heard it, we hadn't got the halfway mark. Maybe we did better in the end. 22, right? 3 requests, right? So when we put it all together, members, stakeholders, partners, the conversations we have here, and over 1,100 members of the public, and then the second go round, we will have as much as a reasonable person might expect we need, frankly, to help shape decisions when we're in a difficult place. But thank you. That's not pushback. That's to round it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Rory, would you like to come in, please?
I think the leaders summed it up perfectly. I think I guess the thing for panel now to consider is whether they wish to make specific recommendations. Clearly, we've captured everything that's been said. But if there were specific recommendations that they'd like to make.
Thank you, councillor Pearson. Yeah, I know you frantically scribble away for me.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've scribbled a couple of things. So hopefully panel will find these recommendations acceptable. So the first one is to feed back to Cabinet the importance of ensuring the voices of rural residents, residents under 18 years of age, and residents who are digitally challenged are given sufficient credence in the final report. I think that takes account of most of the criticisms this evening about the demographics. And the second thing is, and I'm just having a look at our work programme, to review the final report at the next panel meeting with a specific invite to residents to attend with or to submit their views, comments for consideration.
Thank you. That sounds good to me. Can somebody remind me, when is the next stage of this going to Cabinet for Cabinet to have sight of it and discuss? Do you know, David?
No,
Okay.
but you know, it will be as soon as possible. The aim was to conclude this by the end of the year, as I recall, correct? So next cabinet meeting is, I think, 25th of January. So I would expect that we would take that then. That allows us some time to do some extra work if your time allows. But I mean, we understand where we're at. The more important thing is we know we're going to do some more work, that we're going to read that. It depends on your schedule, but let's try and dovetail two together. Perhaps just agree on that.
Oh, I was just going to say whenever it was, I was going to hotfoot it up there. The other thing, did I hear correctly? We can invite people again to complete the survey, or have we got the capacity for that or not?
I think we'll have to give that consideration because clearly the current survey is closed. I think we've listened to everything that the panel has said this evening, recognise the opportunity we might need to give people further opportunity, what that looks like, the time frame for that, the capacity of our staff to be able to analyse it. We'll just need to give that some thought if that's okay, Chair.
No, that's fair. I understand that. So there's two recommendations going forward. Is the panel? Yes. Yes, I think councillor Jarrett is already agreeing.
I'll second it.
Oh, fabulous. And the rest of the panel agree? Thank you. And I forgot to press the button. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, it's 17 minutes to 8 and you might want to ask the panel if they wanted to take a quick break.
I was just about to ask that. Yes, brilliant. Okay, so shall we, 17 minutes to, should we meet back here at 5 to 8? Is that long enough for everybody or 5 to 8? Deal. Right, welcome back, everybody. We now move on to item 8, which has the new title of Colchester Landscape, Nature and Waterways Strategy Development Proposal. And I'll be quite open here. I did have to actually ask, what do we mean by landscape? So, Rosa, are you going to present? Thank you.
Good evening. So this paper sets out a proposal for the panel to work on the development of a new strategy, as explained by the chair, around landscapes, nature and waterways of Colchester. So just a little bit of background, the current Parks and Open Space strategy was launched in 2008, and then the council's Green Infrastructure strategy was launched in 2011. But obviously since that time, how residents, visitors and the public use, view and engage with our spaces, particularly after COVID and lockdown, and along with the ambitions of the council, the uses and views, as I say, have all changed. Now, the council's undertaking really good work in managing its landscapes, its open spaces, its waterways, and that's demonstrated through a number of awards, its Green Flag accreditation, and the council continues with its ambition around biodiversity, particularly following the learning that we've achieved from the award-nominated Woodland and Biodiversity Project, which is now in year 4 of the 5-year programme. And coupled with the recently launched Essex Climate Focus Area by the Essex Climate Action Commission's timing right now is to review and set in place a new strategy. So it's proposed that the policy panel will oversee the development of this new strategy, which will set the direction for a number of activities and developments covering all aspects of open spaces across all areas of the borough, city, which includes also rivers, lakes and coastline. And all of this will have direct contribution to the social, environmental and economic outcomes for the borough. It's proposed that the panel will lead the development of the strategy, working with the portfolio holder and officers. And to do this effectively and to the right level of detail, we propose several workshops, which are in addition to the panel's current forward programme. An update on the progress of the strategy through those workshops will then be provided at each of the policy panel public meetings until such time that the strategy has been fully drafted. Due to the depth and the complexity of the work, it is expected that the programme will take about 18 months. A pilot project has already been undertaken with a trial of a new approach to strategy development, and that's been undertaken in collaboration with the University of Essex, looking at participatory governance and participatory budgeting. This piece of work specifically focused on the River Colne, and the feedback and assessment of this will be fed back through one of the workshops. And that approach could form the basis of how the strategy is further developed in the future, depending obviously on the outcomes and the assessment, the effectiveness of that pilot project. Just to note, paragraph 5.7 of the report refers to the Environment Sustainability Panel. That's a typo from myself and it should be corrected to policy panel. So finally, just to summarise, the panel are asked to agree to undertake the development of the strategy through a series of workshops over the next 18 months, with a recommendation then being taken to Cabinet. That's it, Chair.
Well, I've seen a couple of hands already go up. I think this could be a really exciting opportunity. I know Councillor Jowers has indicated, followed by Councillor Bentley.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll try and be much shorter than I was on the last issue. I absolutely agree. This is really important. It's the first time in many, well, ever, I think, I've seen coast. You know, that Colchester has actually recognised it has a deep coastline. You didn't hear that on the mic, I hope. In years, for many, many years, it was actually decried, you know, that Mersey actually has a beach and a harbour. And it leads me on to the next issue of tourism, is that Dedham and Mersey are doing exactly what we're anticipating for the last item in terms of tourism. They're overwhelmed. They can't cope with it. And there has to be some kind of review as to what kind of tourism do you want? I'd again quote the fact I've worked for years in France, is that you go to somewhere like Cancale or many of the coastal ports, they specialise in seafood restaurants. That's what's happening in Mersey, and it's drawing people in from far further than you'd imagine. I mean, I had one speedboat tie up at the causeway, and people had come from Chelsea Harbour for an oyster lunch, you know, like 70 odd miles in a speedboat. So again, there is no parking. You try and get anywhere near the harbour in Mersey in the summer, actually part times in the winter, you're not going to get there. The other issue that I think needs to be looked at very closely, and I think it's been tangentially touched on, is access, and certainly for the Cone. Now, this came up years ago with Ken Jones, Councillor Jones. Some of you might remember. You would remember him, Paul, wouldn't you? We pushed and pushed and pushed to get a development in Rowhedge on the river frontage, and they put a little slipway in, and it was blocked, I think, by the residents. Where can you launch a paddleboard, one of the most popular, booming sports in the country? Where can you launch even a dinghy on the River Cone? You can't. And from my point of view, it's one of the most amazing assets to the town. Certainly on the upper ridge, it's a stunningly beautiful river, actually. So it's access. And I think, you know, if you just sort of lump them all in and give it too much of an environmental bias, certain areas, I think we propose that from Wivenhoe down should have a very specific environmental bias, because Essex Wildlife Trust have done the new breach. We have a disused quarry with sheep piling alongside it. Which one is it? Not Langenhoe Quarry, basically. Actually, the oldest business in Colchester, Priors. There's already access made if we look at it and say, look, where can we sort of intervene and maybe put a little bit of funding in? So you've got one where there's scope. We've got an amazing country park at Cudmore Grove, which, you know, environmentally is just great. Doesn't want touching. How many does that get, Kevin, in terms of tourism? Amazing, thousands. So it's all right, we can sort of improve on those, but it's also looking for where we're overlooked. I mentioned it earlier about the Cone. Is, you know, it's just a dreadful place. You go down there and it's, yeah, what is it? It's just silted up. It's got people who can't find anywhere else to moor. I'm got to be very polite about them, but they won't be allowed in an awful lot of other places, that is for sure, because it's becoming a kind of a dumping ground. And yet that could be one of the most vibrant, most beautiful parts of Colchester. So when you're looking at that sort of issue in the river, it's balancing tourism out against the environment. And it's, again, trying to be more specific about, you've got to do it from area to area, and quite small areas in some cases. You really wouldn't want a yacht club on the land next door to the sewage works. But actually, you could do a brilliant piece of funding somewhere like Rowhedge, which again is more tide. So I think I'm all in favour of this. And I think it needs to, this is just the outline, isn't it? And once you delve deeper into it, start looking at, again, demographics, you know. My kids live on the River Stour at Bures, and there's a constant stream of paddleboards going up and down. It's so popular. It sort of appeals to something in the human nature, I think, being on the water. Don't forget about Mersey, you never get on it because you can't get anywhere near it, can you? But no, I just, you know, as a starter, again, chunk it down. And I'll do.
Thank you. If I could just ask a quick question, what sort of numbers are you looking for on this group?
So my proposal would be that the panel together collectively meets with me, the portfolio holder and other officers fairly regularly. We'll agree a programme and we will undertake workshops between an hour to up to 3 hours, maybe face-to-face or online, still to be determined. And what we will do, we'll start working through the process of how we will develop that strategy and take forward aspects of consultation, etc. One of the first sessions will be to feedback to you in more detail on the project that was undertaken with the university. The final report of that is in draft at the moment. We're just consulting with those that participated to make sure that they're their words and their views are properly represented in that report. And what we propose to do is then provide that to you. It's an academic report, so it's quite a few pages, but there's also a summary document. And we'd like the university, along with our officers, to explain that process, what the outcomes were, because I think it will well inform us on that approach going forward and the things that we need to be thinking about. And you're absolutely right in terms of looking at area. We talk about landscapes, waterways, and nature, and by the very nature of that, all different areas do need a particular focus and a different particular approach. The communities that live near those areas as well, I think we need to focus on. So I think you're right in terms of our approach. We will need to almost divide the borough into different sections, and we will focus on each of those. And that's kind of where we're thinking about in terms of going forward with that. But I'd like to get your views on that first pilot project, and if that is something that we will continue. And I think the university would be keen to continue working with us as well.
That's good. Sorry to sort of like take over here, but I'm just wondering, you know, are we going to publish an agenda of what's coming up at these meetings? Because I bet there are councillors who are not on this panel would have very specific details, and if something came up, have we got the capacity to, you know, if they wanted to drop in and share their knowledge with us?
Again, I think that's something we can develop and discuss with
Yeah,
the
thank you.
portfolio holder going forward. But yeah, we would definitely create a forward programme. And as I said, we'll be providing updates at each of these policy panel meetings as well. So they'll all be recorded. And in terms of developing the strategy, if we were to take that participatory budget and governance approach, everybody, communities, third sector, etc., will all be able to be involved in the development of that.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you very much indeed. I never quite know whether I should declare these interests, but you mentioned the climate change action plan. That's a very core policy of the County Council and underpins everyone's Essex plan. So whether that's declarable or not, I don't know, but it's a chance for me to talk about it anyway, which is publicity is all very good. And of course, I say Essex, by that I mean all of us, because climate change isn't by some, it affects all of us, and we all have to take action to do something about it. I think this is a fabulous piece of work. And actually, we are forming policy. We haven't done that for a long time, so I think that's really good, and it's a good way of thinking for this city council to do. Just a few thoughts around that. I certainly would open this up to other councillors automatically. Don't restrict it just this panel. There are many, and we lost one in former Councillor Chillingworth, but people who are very skilled in these areas and will have knowledge of these areas. And some town, sorry, I beg your pardon, I've done it now, city centre councillors where the Colne goes into will have knowledge of this and other rivers too. Councillor Giles and I will share the Roma River, but there again, so will Councillor Harris as well, and others in that part of the world. I think we should just make sure we're opening up this up to other people who have knowledge. And what is so important around this is why climate change is so important that this features here, not just in landscaping. We have to landscape for the next 100 years. We have to think that far ahead, and we have to make some changes the way we landscape as well. But we are seeing rises in water levels and certainly river levels, and we've got to start thinking about that. We also know, I know certainly through highways, that how it rains is different. So when people complain that the drains are blocked, no, they're not. Quite often they're not blocked. They just can't cope with that level of rainfall in that period of time. And then I used to say to people, just wait, it will go, and it will go naturally. They're not blocked. They are just can't cope. So that's an indication where climate is important. So I fully endorse this. I would certainly open it up to other councils. Whether we need to recommend that or not, I don't know. I'll leave the technicalities to other people. I would also further, since the leader is here and via you, Chair, I would suggest rather than just the cabinet member, you need a champion for this. I think this within the council, a champion, preferably elected member, but not necessarily for the leader maybe to consider or dismiss, I don't know. But that person take responsibility on behalf of the council to report back to the portfolio holder these findings. Then we have real ownership of this. And then we will indicate to the public why landscaping and waterways may sound not terribly exciting. It is a critical part of how we're going to deal with climate change in the future.
Thank you. Paul, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes. Looking at this, I'm looking a bit at the linkage between the various elements here, because in the environment, that's what's so important. And I'm want to see that when we develop the strategy, we develop the links between the various areas as well. This is perhaps particularly more relevant to the urban areas where we have local nature reserves and what have you. There's one, for example, at Salary Brook. We could do a great job down there, but if we don't preserve links with that to the open countryside, the wildlife is not going to get there. So I think what we need to build in here, and I'd like to be more explicit about this, is that we're also looking at the links to ensure we get biodiversity and we don't just get a sterile green patch here and another one in the next ward, but we have a link between them for the wildlife, the biodiversity to happen there, because I think that is really important to develop, and something which in the past the council has perhaps not done. We've developed Highwoods Country Park, a great example, but are we thinking, well, okay, if we build houses all the way around Highwoods Country Park, the deer in there eventually are going to be exterminated and they'll die out. So I think we need to have those links in there, and that needs to come through the planning process and what have you to protect it. So I would like to see that, but otherwise I'm very supportive of what we're seeing down here, that this is something that we need to tackle as a council, and it's great to see that we're reviewing the policy, and I would commend that to the Cabinet.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, you're spot on in what you're saying. I mean, Councillor Arnold has been banging on to me about wildlife corridors linking up, and have we got the records of where all the wildlife corridors are and how we're going to link them all up? So have we thought, I mean, we've said about, you know, everybody who's got an interest can come along, but I'm just wondering if we need a link with the environmental panel, whether, you know, somebody would like to come from there and join us, you know, and then it's a two-way linked up process. And Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing to stop us from having a joint meeting with the Environment Panel if we feel that that's the way forward and they're in agreement. Yeah, Councillor Smith and yourself just then have picked up on one of the things that I wanted to pick up on. I think John Jowers is quite right that we do need to recognise that we are a coastal city. We're not an inland city. But I came here tonight thinking that one of the things that's missing from this report is a register of our land and coastal assets, because I'm not sure what belongs to Colchester, what we have control over, what we need to exercise some, not necessarily control, but some pressure over, bearing in mind the nature corridors, reserves that we have, and one that we'd like to see elsewhere in the town as well. I'd completely forgotten, Kevin, until you mentioned it, that Roman River runs across my ward as well. So there are, I know, it's only before I came here, but I think it's essential that we have an asset register that we can look at before we start to develop anything, because without that, I don't think we can develop our strategy effectively, because it needs to be joined up. We can't have siloed bits here and there. I did have a question about the workshops. I think we sort of teased out some of that. And I thought the bit in 5.5 about what the emphasis was, strategy will need to carefully consider the following. I think we'd also need to add and be in line with the council's priorities as determined by Cabinet at the beginning of the municipal year. Because obviously anything and everything that we do as a council should be joined up and follow those priorities. But no, some really good stuff there, but it's going to be a lot of work for a lot of us, isn't it? But I take the point that I think all of us have made around the table, that we need to involve and include every member, but also to ensure that we bring along anybody who feels that they have a view or an expertise and can assist us.
Yes, I agree. Councillor Law.
Thank you. You know, I think this is a really important piece of work because it really all links up as well to climate emergency. And I think, you know, with the extreme weather we had this year and the summer, you know, particularly say residents in Highwoods with the country park and open spaces and being concerned about, you know, possible fire risk in the summer and things. So people are really aware of, you know, climate issues and how biodiversity is important. But sort of thinking aside of practicalities of moving forward with these workshops and meetings, I think it is really important, echoing what others have said, about engaging as many stakeholders, you know, community interest groups, residents as possible and other councillors. But I'm just interested to see how agendas will be sort of shaped for each meeting, because it can also be difficult when you've got so many people involved to be able to focus on specifics. And also, I wonder what the kind of models might be used in terms to structure the work going forward. So, for example, if certain key elements are identified, with sort of things like theory of change be used at some point to help identify kind of next steps to reach those end goals.
Thank you, Councillor Giles.
Again, another fairly swift point is that I think we'd also need to, for the cabinet at least, once this has been recommended, they need liaison with the planning department, because the local plan is about to restart. And that relates back to the point I made about access. We haven't been very good at it in the past. We've built, but we haven't opened it up anywhere, apart from that one tiny example in Row, which didn't really work. So I think via Section 106 agreements and whatever, that the planners really could have a look at this and see how could they enhance whatever they build in terms of using the river as not an entertainment, but as an asset to everyone on the culture. So I'd like to see that the progress through would be from us to cabinet to planning.
Do you know what? This warms the cockles of my heart listening to you lot. I mean, I just love it that we all see it as a real opportunity and we're all up for it. I think Rosa, we've got to obviously have a structured agenda and way forward that we can work with other people. Rosa, would you like to come back and answer any points that people have made? David, I'd like you to have an opportunity to speak if you would like to. And Rory, you can put your 2 pence in as well.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk a bit more about the workshops, just to be really clear on what we're proposing and make sure that you understand what we're describing. So what we're describing is this panel coming together outside of these formal public meetings, as I say, face to face or possibly online, for officers to kind of share with you lots and lots of detail, lots of information that probably wouldn't be relevant and not enable the kind of conversation we would have if we were around a table about the development of the strategy. In amongst those workshops, subject to the outcome of the pilot project that we did with the university, and just so I can give a bit more detail of what that means, the pilot project that we did, we invited councillors, community groups and other third sector organisations, and also other nationally represented organisations like the Woodland, the National Trust, and I think of the others, Essex Wildlife Trust and others. And they came to specific workshops that were undertaken at the university, facilitated by their staff, exploring participatory governance in essence around the River Colne. And we talked about all the economic, social and environmental impacts of that stretch of river. And it was really interesting in what we heard back and what the communities and themselves wanted to be involved in. We talked about funding, we talked about opportunities, we talked about challenges and risks. And I'd like to share that in much more detail with you outside of this meeting. And subject to that conversation, look to continue that work, but the officers will deliver that and we'll feed back to the workshops with you as a panel outside of these public meetings, so that you can then continue to steer way forward with that consultation work in effect and that development of the strategy, and then we'll keep coming back to you fairly regularly to layer that strategy together, if that hopefully that makes a bit more sense. So whilst I appreciate that you want to involve lots of councillors, they'll have that opportunity as we start to look at those more detailed work using the pilot as a springboard or template going forward. So for example, we've looked at the River Cole, and it might be that we take Mersey and the coastline as another example, and we will invite all of the relevant people that have a particular interest in that particular area, or those people that don't have an interest but should have a voice at the table, and we'll develop work with them and then feed that back to the workshops with you with lots more detail so that you can help steer that strategy going forward. So hopefully that gives you a bit more clarity of what I'm describing, and hence why we're looking at about an 18-month programme, because you can imagine the amount of work in bringing those kind of people together and having really good detailed conversations, but to create something that's really tangible and that has got community, voices at the heart of it.
I mean, it's just such a massive piece of work, but such an exciting piece of work. And John is indicating again. Go on, John.
No, just to give you a help with that, Rosa, is that many years ago, we used to have a planner called David Cookson, some of you might remember. And it was a West Mersey waterside strategy published. So you've got quite a lot of stuff there that probably was also a Wivenhoe one, but definitely there was a Mersey one. It need updating to an nth degree, but the bones of it are there. So it's not, and the other thing is I'd just be a little bit cautious about whom you invite. The university will have a specific view. It will have an academician's view on what's being done. And we're going to have to translate it into what real people, it's not real people, have to translate it into what actually residents on the Riverside do. So that's like the reason that Leslie's mentioned the riparian councillors, like there's 3 on Mersey, there's 2, I think they do need to be involved, and they will. And I think you're right that they have a specific interest. But you can't separate that out because the river it's a whole entity, So yeah, I think that there's quite a lot of background stuff that's worth looking at again.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. My little brain cogs are going, and I just think when we're having the workshops, we still need to let people on the environmental panel know that this is what we're going to be discussing, because you've just come out with what I would call a golden nugget of information that maybe other people didn't know that was there, and that will help the way forward. So that's why I love a bit of sharing.
Thank you. I'm really pleased this has landed so well this evening. It is a really exciting piece of work, isn't it? Just touching on the interrelationship between panels, because I think it's something we've debated as officers. I think we've debated it here a bit before as well. And the merit of, does this best sit with the Environment Sustainability Panel? Does it best sit with Policy Panel? Could we do a piece of work together? We're quite conscious we don't want it to be too unwieldy. And Councillor Law made very point around, a pragmatic approach. I hope that Rosa's explained that actually being really truly consultative, bringing in the expertise and the knowledge across all of our all members and places is really relevant to this. But I'm mindful that we do need a core group of people to drive this forward, and I think that's the ask of the policy panel, to be that core group to really help us drive this piece of work forward. That's not to say you will be the only people with and the only conduit into being able to influence this. That's not the case, and hopefully we've given you that assurance tonight. But I would be mindful of making it too complicated. I think we need to share the information, share it well, and we can certainly bring updates to Environment and Sustainability Panel. But I would be mindful of merging it all together. I think it would become quite complex.
Yeah, I was very mindful. I didn't want it to be too unwieldy. Councillor Laws.
I just wanted to come back in really and say that I think it's really important that, partners like the University of Essex are involved because of the rigour they can bring in terms of, not that council officers aren't rigorous, but just me, sorry, I don't want that to come out wrong, but in terms of their sort of approaches and to tap into different areas of expertise. But it's also maybe where also council officers can come in to enable or to facilitate the language and the findings that come out and translate it into terms that our residents, and so that, enable that engagement with our communities, really.
Thank you, David. You've heard a lot here. I'm so chuffed with the positivity that's coming from this table. It's awesome.
Of course, look at the people around it. What else could it be? A couple of observations, if I may. But the first most important thing is I absolutely welcome what I'm hearing. You'd expect me to, because I watch it from a distance. This reflects what we said we would do. I say the same thing as earlier on the earlier item, which is that we would release the energy of councillors and those rather than just say, would you sign this off? This is so much better way of working. I love the idea that we're going to have an engagement and use the talents and the knowledge of people like the University of Essex, because that's been one of my big things, that we get closer in lots of different ways. We get in the habit and pattern of using their skills and making us their local laboratory. They can get some gain from that in terms of research, which has a wider implication. We would obviously get some advantage, or we could, depending on how that folds. Kevin, if I may say so, I've got to declare an interest too, because Essex Climate Change Commission, which I know by your nature of role, but personally wanting to make happen and have made happen, there's a lot of work there. I'm not sure where we are of all of that. There is a conversation between the two councils about how to then make things happen, because the studies and papers are one thing and implementation is a more challenging, more expensive business. But there's a lot here, isn't there, for all of us? And all I would just sort of add beyond what I've just said is this is in the spirit of how I wanted us to work. I will come and go with cabinet, cabinets do, and leaders are carted off every now and again. But we set a pattern here, and by the way we work, which will carry on despite those kind of changes. So great, thank you.
Thank you. So no further comments. So what we've got to do, helps if I put my glasses on the right way up, is to agree to undertake work to develop a new strategy through a series of workshops. Are we all in favour of that? I think we are. Thank you. Now we're going to go to the work programme. Owen, are you going to lead on that?
Yes, Chairman. I did have a quick update on the item relating to voter ID, which the panel considered earlier in this municipal year. We now have confirmation that the secondary legislation, which was needed for the voter ID primary legislation to come into effect for the elections in May of next year, is now going through. So yes, we don't have a confirmation of the wording. We've still only got draft wording, but I've talked to Andrew Weavers, monitoring officer, about this and about scheduling, and he's recommending scheduling it for 1st of March 2023. Now, it's not ideal given that that's quite close to the elections themselves, but unfortunately, because the secondary legislation is being introduced at such a late stage, if we do it any earlier, we may end up considering draft secondary legislation which doesn't reflect the final provisions. So we're recommending that be put on the work programme for 1st of March.
Sorry, so we're clear. Is this legislation making it compulsory, or if it's compulsory, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about.
My understanding is that we're talking about that if you want to vote, you have to have a certain sort of identification, whether it's a driving license, passport, blue badge, I think might qualify.
Thank you. If I may, yes, I think when the panel considered it the first time, I think the main questions were what implications does this have for us as a council, such as extra financial implications of having to have extra staff to check ID.
That's all true, but that's not. It's no longer a policy. It's going to happen. So that actually needs to sit with the cabinet to have that discussion. We can have a discussion. I've no worry having a discussion about it, but we can't set any policy or advise on policy because the law is the law. It then comes down to how you're going to finance and resource it, and that's probably not our remit. I mean, I'm happy to have the discussion, but I don't quite know what the recommendation would be.
You're right. I think it's on our radar because we had a visitor, a speaker came who was concerned about making it as accessible as possible because not everybody has. Yeah, over to you, Owen.
There was also the question raised, and I'll just be brief, about the voter identification documentation scheme, which all local authorities would have to. And I think, you know, potentially it's not for me to say what would be relevant for the panel to look at, but certainly I think that was raised as something which individual panel members were interested in seeing how that would be arranged and potentially offering recommendations.
No, I know you want to come in, Chris, but if it's something where we can set a bit of policy where there's a little bit of openness to play with, I think that's a discussion. If it's set in tablets of stone, thou shalt do this, then there's no point in us discussing it. That's a resource matter. But if there's open for interpretation, then I think absolutely should come here. That's the discussion.
It was, my feeling was, it was the interpretation. Chris, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think that was it. That when Andrew Weaver's brought it to us, there were questions and queries that we had that he couldn't answer. There were questions that he had that he obviously couldn't answer until we knew what the wording of the secondary legislation was. The view of the panel was that be brought back to us, that we could have a view, we could take a view, and we could make that view known to Cabinet well in advance of the election. It's obviously going to be very close, but I think we're all very concerned that no one is disenfranchised and that we have something in place that reduces the risk of being disenfranchised.
I think the thing that worries me is we've got the January meeting, the March meeting. If we do it in March, that is so close to the election for people to get the identification and the ID that they might need. If we do it in January, as you said yourself, Owen, things might change, but maybe if we look at it in January, because we'll have an idea, and then we can take it from there. So we can do the early first stages to talk about what the implications and get the word out. Councillor Bentley.
Yeah, not wishing to prolong it. I think that's right. So if it's going to be March, then our election team would have got the plans in place. So we ought to perhaps, if it is March, we have the election officer here as well as Andrew here, Mr. Weaver's here, because then we need to know what they are then doing, because by March it's up and running, it's planned, it's done. We have to get it in place. So it would be good to ask those questions. But then, of course, I think it'd be good to have the leader in the Cabinet here as well, because they'll have to resource it.
And that's what we're talking. Chris, come back in.
Yeah, could I just suggest as an alternative? Because it's not a meeting that we would need to make any decision about or to vote on. So my suggested alternative is that we find a date in mid-February maybe, where we could do it online, we could include everyone, we could have a discussion, and then Cabinet goes away with the views from that discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, but I'm just going to have to be a complete pain and say, could we have a face-to-face meeting? Because I actually do find it easier than rather online. So if that could be accommodated, that would be really useful. Are we up to seeing if we can agree a mid-February meeting?
Would that be sorry, just to be clear, that wouldn't be a formal meeting. Am I right in from what I heard, or would that be a formal meeting?
Okay, I mean, my thinking is it's not our job, but we need to get the word out there. And I think that if we had a meeting in February, we could get the word out there. I mean, I know it's going to be in the paper, but people might not realise what the implications is. I think Adam is moving closer and Rory is indicating. So Adam, would you like to go first, or Rory, would you like to go first?
My only suggestion might be that it would work better as a briefing for all members. In February might be the right sort of time to do that ahead of when local elections, and I'm sure by that stage, Andrew Weavers and the elections team would also have a clear plan about how they were implementing what are now, I think, the guidelines that are available to.
Yeah, you're right. Rory, did you
Yeah,
want to?
that was going to be my suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's,
We'll obviously speak to as monitoring officer and his assistant returning officer, isn't he? And I suggest, all member briefing, and then members can use the information they gain from that to communicate out to constituents. We can pick up the comms and whatnot as well.
yeah, no, that sounds really good, because I mean, as Kevin said, the law is the law. We can't change it. So I think that's the way to deal with our concerns. So yes, if that could be factored in, that would be brilliant. Thank you. So back to the work programme.
Well, I'm totally discombobulated, Chairman. I don't think I had anything else to add to it at the start of this meeting, but I think given the conversations we've had from previous items here, looking at how we used the meetings on 11th of January and 1st of March. Where were we going with this? I think we had
Pass, I'm just about to look it up myself.
So, Chair, I was going to come back. So we've agreed already just to bring back the report that we discussed. We've got city status on there anyway. And I suppose we need to just come back with the plan for the workshops on landscape and what are we calling it? Landscape and waterways.
Yeah, we can certainly add those, and I'll make a note, although we don't need to formally note the workshops as they're not formal meetings. I think it probably would help if we add those in as to the work programme so that people know that they're going on.
Well, would the workshops just be an update?
Yes, apologies. I mean, noting the dates in the work programme items. Yeah.
Excellent. And then in March, we've got the grounds maintenance contract. And has anybody got any, Councillor Smith, you're looking at your watch there.
I was assisting Councillor Giles, who was concerned about the stuff.
I'm just saying that my supper will be cinders if I don't press on.
Well, we can't have that, can we? So the action required, note the dates, everybody happy? Yep. In which case, go and rescue your dinner, Councillor Giles, the meeting's closed.
Yeah, no, I think there was a mistake because I was talking about just having noting the dates and what we're doing in the workshops rather than the report. Yeah.